Welcome to Conversations with Cox and Kielseth, and to be more specific, that is filmmaker Alex Cox and myself, film curator Pablo Kielseth. Alex will join us by phone from his home in Oregon, while I sneak away from my office to call him from one of the projection booths used by the International Film Series, which has been screening foreign and independent movies at CU Boulder since 1941. We will keep our chats to about 20 minutes as we discuss whatever movie-related topics grab our fancy. Thanks for joining us.
Alejandro.
Pablo.
Alan. Alex, I want to say hello to our guest today, Alan Caudillo.
Hey, Alan. Pleased to meet you.
Alex, how are you?
Very well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing quite well here in lovely Los Angeles.
Oh, the city of the angels.
I should add a quick note here. We were going to have Jeff Marslet, and we'll probably still have him again later, but he had to do something else, and we got Alan, who was kind enough to step in. Alan is a filmmaker. He's a cinematographer, director of photography, a camera operator. And I wanted, from what we were talking about last time, Alex, we were thinking about just talking about, gun fetishism in cinema. And Alan his filmography. Alan, I was just looking you up today. I'm very impressed, sir. You've got 93 movies to your credit.
It's crazy, Biz.
Yeah.
93 films that you shot?
No, just that I worked on. I've probably shot maybe 20 films, though.
Oh, wow. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
But he's worked on the recent Russell Crowe Unhinged, as well as Alan, you've done some work with the director of Con Air, right?
That's correct. I've shot 3 movies for Simon West, and then I've shot actually the gunfire stuff on a handful of others, like 4 or 5 others. So you're the perfect person to kind of bring into this discussion. I mean, and I also want to say one more thing before I forget, Alex, is that Alan was one of the kind souls who actually read our script that you and I worked on. So,
wow,
which I thoroughly
He's
enjoyed.
Our reader.
Yeah. I did want there to be a Repo Man reference at the end. I understand you didn't want that, but I get it.
I think you can only have 2. You can have too many Repo Man references. Repo Man 2, turns out Repo Man is a reference to a John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John movie. They take off in a flying Grease.
Oh, in Grease, yeah, correct. At the end, that's true,
right.
Isn't it?
They leave in a flying car. I didn't even know that. And the guys who came up with the idea for the ending didn't tell me it was the ending of Grease.
Oh, you're kidding.
Well, they're very, very different movies.
I see them as essentially the same movie, just with a different cast. But yeah, okay.
yeah, just a different cast. It's like Olivia Newton-John is Emilio, and
that's right.
etc. Yeah.
Yeah. John Travolta also Emilio. Interestingly enough, that's just
also Emilio. Yeah.
Well, it's a great movie, Alex. I love it very much. So,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
So today we wanted to sort of focus on. I mean, obviously, as anyone who's been listening to this before knows, I live and do these podcasts from Boulder. Where I stand is literally a 10-minute bicycle ride to the King Supers, where there was recently the mass shootout that killed 10 people.
Well, mass shooting, and I used to live like 2 blocks away, and we have had many beers right next door in the Southern Sun.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that, I also I have colleagues who teach film classes, and it was interesting because some of them forged ahead with the films that they had on their syllabus, even though they might have material that is obviously going to touch on, there was Pulp Fiction and Targets, I think, were films that were specifically in some of the classes. And I heard some people saying, well, that's not wise. And I understand why. I mean, it could take a long time for people to deal with the trauma. And so I just wanted to kind of bring this around. We have very informal 20-minute gab fest. We're not going to solve any world problems here, but it's more of a just informal, what is it that, I'm a film exhibitor, Alan, you're a filmmaker, and Alex, you're a film director. And obviously there's this one quote out there: all you need to make a movie is a girl and a gun. And it's usually attributed to Jean-Luc Godard, although I think he may have attributed to D.W. Griffith. But either way, it's certainly true that since the earliest days of cinema, guns have always been on the screen, very prevalent. In fact, in 1903, Edwin S. Porter, a silent movie, a 12-minute short called The Great Train Robbery, and it shows someone breaking the fourth wall to fire a gun into the audience. So the cinema has been gun crazy ever since the very, very beginning. And in fact, Alan, when I was looking at your IMDb credits and I saw the movie poster for The Mechanic, it has a silhouette of a gun that's actually construed of a whole bunch of smaller guns within the silhouette. And I think you said you had some experiences that you wanted to maybe shine a light on in terms of what it's like to be behind the camera and then seeing, that stuff being played out. To what extent are we as film exhibitors and makers putting stuff on the screen that allows for gun fetishists to wrap themselves into an identity thing that just ends up being really harmful?
I have shot a lot of movies, and I've shot a lot of gun stuff. And I think I told you, we had a conversation earlier, I actually have hearing loss from working around gunfire, like working on fully automatic weapons and 50 caliber machine guns and explosives. And the unions and the studios are much better about that now, about helping people who are working on film sets take care of their hearing as well as all the other, it's staying alive and not getting shot or hurt. But back then you would just sort of, it was just chaos and you were sort of kind of on your own to sort of make sure you were protected. But I have to say that I am super guilty of fetishizing gun violence. I can name 5 movies that I've photographed, or at least, especially some of the action things I've done for other, it wasn't the principal cinematographer in it, but I shot the action bit. The Mechanic is a great example where, I was shooting fantastic 400 frame per second, super fast push-ins on 50 caliber, casings ejected from the gun and racking focus, the same shot to the things exploding in the background and blood and gore and the whole stuff and the fire and explosions. And it's super sexy at 400 frames per second. Everything is amazing with the score and it looks great.
Well, you're the cameraman, the cinematographer. You're basically a hired hand, right?
Yeah, I get hired to make gun porn. For that, I have to say that over the last 4 years, thank goodness I haven't. Well, it's not true, but mostly I haven't a movie that had any guns in them. I did do a TV series that was all gun porn, which was awful, but yeah, I think as filmmakers we are actually culpable, and even as a cinematographer, I get kudos for shooting that stuff when the dailies come back and the executives see it and the director, everybody's like freaking out at these amazing photographs of gun porn and making it seem super exciting and very cool. And even when the actors manipulating the weapons on set while we're filming are just terrified of these things, for the most part.
But is there a line to be drawn? Because I remember seeing John Woo films when they first came out, which happened to be before, having a mass shooting was something that just seemed to happen every other day. And for me, it was always just like, that's a movie. That's not real life. So to what extent is there some culpability of gullibility on people or as viewers, and Alex, I don't mean to, because Alex, you've directed quite a few. You've directed a great Western, for example, Walker, which had some incredible scenes in it, but how do you, what do you think about this?
Well, when we were talking about it last week, I kind of totaled up the films that I've made, and I think it's like 14 or 15 or something like that I've directed. Only 2 of them don't have guns in them. And that's, and my life doesn't revolve around guns at all, and yet when making a movie, it's an easy kind of shorthand. You want to get the You want to get the audience's pulse racing a little bit. Well, when he opens the glove compartment, don't just have a driver's license in there, have a handgun, and it's kind of storytelling light, isn't it? Because you just put in some guns and you just get the audience's attention. And it is, I think that what you said is right, Pablo, and that we are culpable of lazy filmmaking and of encouraging the idea that possession of powerful automatic weapons is in some way normal.
It's a cheat. It's a shortcut, because the thing is that what you're doing is you're accelerating what is at issue, which is death. It's our mortality. But nobody wants to pay to see people dying slowly in an old folks' home,
Who knows? They don't get given the opportunity. Maybe they'd enjoy it.
Well, in this age of COVID, that's actually been far too pressing reality on the news screen. So but it's not the immediacy that comes with like the it's to be or not to be. It's like someone said, it's not even a question, but with a gun, those words are posed there immediately. And it's not a slow thing. And so I do think it's a cheat. It's a shortcut. And there is a certain amount of laziness to it, because I think there's a lot of ways that you could actually have a very exhilarating movie that is about, dealing with mortality, that has nothing to do with, firepower and that kind of.
No, all I would say, yeah, absolutely, because all of us die, but very few of us die from gun violence.
This is true. Well, I would say that too. That I think that a couple of things about like death. I mean, when we think about Boulder, I think about Stan Brakhage and studying with him, and for him, cinema is death and sex, and the two are the same thing at some point, right? Like a lot of the stuff, it's like sex and death. They're almost other sides of the same coin. I'm just throwing that out as for the Artie Boulder.
That was actually fans. That was the name of one of his classes, I think.
Sex, Death, and Cinema. I love that class. However, I want to lazy. I agree, and I was saying that with one exception, the last 5 years I haven't done any gun things. The thing I did a series for a network show that was about LA detectives. So I spent 9 months pretending to shoot cops LA sheriffs doing LA sheriffs things. And at some point, episode 10, the sheriff had killed like 15 people, and at some point you realize that these guys are sociopaths. And if they were actually killing that many people, they would because there are actually protocols. If you shoot somebody, then you go on. You have to sort of go to have a desk job for weeks before as they work stuff out. So it was really lazy writing, honestly. And at some point, we just kind of put the kibosh on it. We just stopped doing it. We would shoot stuff where they didn't actually kill them. They found some other way to apprehend the bad guys instead of just shooting them, which is it was insane. So it's lazy writing. And the other thing, I think it's important. Well, maybe not important, but I think it's interesting to differentiate between like the John Woo movies and what's happening today with the John Wick and Deadpool and this new generation of cinema that we have. I think that the John Woo movies were really like hyper realized fantasy, and that it was not uncommon for somebody to have a weapon that had 12 rounds in it, and they would for 25 minutes they would be shooting this gun and cocking it between every little bit of dialogue, which you would never do with an automatic weapon anyways. So it was all fantasy.
It never runs out of bullets.
It never runs out of bullets. It's just this fantasy of and the slow motion and the doves and stuff. And so then the violence was I have to think that he was talking about the violence as part of the story.
It was more of a dream. It was almost more of a dreamscape, really, than something that felt to me situated in the very real world. I mean, like in Hard Boiled, you don't when you see Chow Yun-fat, just strap himself around a fire hose with a baby in his hand and then running through a building and cascading beyond a window or something. That's not something that that traces or tracks with the real world.
That's right. Well, but again, in the new cinema, like the new action movies that are. Like I said, the John Wicks and these other films, like the protagonist in John Wick, doesn't, again, it's real. And I know those filmmakers, so I know that that's really important for them, that the weapon is a Glock 17. You have 17 rounds in it, or 18 with one in the chamber, and you shoot 18. Once that happens, it's done, and they count. So they make sure that it's real.
But that's what Pablo would call fetishism too, isn't it? It's just a fetishism, attention to detail. And
it's also like very brutal. Like in the John Woo movies, he shoots somebody and they die. And in the John Wick movie, he shoots somebody. He shoots him twice in the chest. He shoots him twice in the head. And then as he's walking out, he shoots him a couple times, even just to make sure. And there is a little bit of pornography there with that.
Brutality. There's a inherent brutality that escapes from, that goes way beyond the escapism of John Woo, I think.
Well, I want to say a word now in favor of the fetishists, not the movie fetishists, but the guys you're calling the gun fetishists, because I have friends who are rednecks. And I identify more closely with them than I do with any Hollywood liberal. Mm-hmm. I have, like the guy in the Richard Jewell movie.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? The Clint Eastwood's most recent. Yeah. And when the lawyer says to him, "Do you have any guns in the house?" And the guy brings out an arsenal. And yet, as depicted in the movie, but also I think in real life, Richard Jewell isn't a killer. He's not a psycho. He's a somewhat overweight kind of, doofusy guy who lives with his mom and is an American. Mm-hmm. And he's the kind of guy that will help you if you are in trouble. I don't mean by bringing out a gun, but by helping you change the wheel on your car. While 150 liberals drive right by, and so my redneck friends, they're not going to give up their guns, and nothing any noble liberal liar will tell them will get them to give up their guns, because they know already the media is biased against them, and they don't buy into that system anymore. And so in that sense, I think in a way, agreeing with Pablo, it's even more important for us as filmmakers not to buy into the easy depiction of guns and gun culture, and try and address a little bit more the reality of people like Richard Jewell, who aren't psychos.
Yeah,
just because they have a gun.
Alex, I grew up in Longmont back in the 70s, when it was actually just a little farm town, not just a suburb of Boulder. And, I grew up with guns. Me and my dad would go hunting. Me and my friends, and when we were 10, 11 years old, before school, would ride our bicycles with our shotguns across our bikes out to the cornfields to go hunting, and then go to school after school. And when we were in high school, we would actually go hunting and just put the guns and the ducks in a cooler in our trunk and park at school and go to school. So the gun culture was like, it was we all had to take gun safety training. We were all very serious about it. Nobody that I grew up with, went on a killing spree. Everybody was, it was like you were hunting because then you'd have a goose, and you could have a goose for Thanksgiving, or, that sort of thing. And so I agree with you that there's a huge gap between Hollywood liberals and middle America, and the two don't speak the same language, and I think as a Hollywood liberal, I'm in this sort of no man's land of that. Because I agree with you. Like, I have cousins who just couldn't be the most Trump supporting redneck, awful person in the world. And if somebody who looked like Osama bin Laden was driving his car back by their ranch and their tire went out and they knocked on the door for help, they'd let them in, they'd feed them, they'd change their tire, they'd take them to the store. They wouldn't let them pay for it, and then send them on their way.
Yes.
So yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that's pretty astute.
And it's kind of the loveliest aspect of this culture, really, is how people really will help you out, when you're in trouble. And I'm in the volunteer fire department, and the head of the fire department, I mean, we never talk about politics, but I know he's a Republican, and he's got a collection of John Wayne DVDs. There are other people in the fire department who are like Greens or dope growers, although they probably packing pistols too on the dope plantation. But one thing that everybody gets together, whether they're a leftist or a green or a liberal or a conservative, if there's a fire, we all get together to put out the fire. And so I think if we can only remember all the things we've got in common, rather than let a kind of identity politics and a kind of a media snobbishness divide us.
Yeah,
I think connectivity is definitely something that is incredibly important, and maybe an even bigger problem than what Alan referred to as gun porn put on the big screen might be the fact that we are living in a time when it's even easier than ever before to be isolated, to be, especially, the pandemic hasn't helped in that regard. But I mean, if you're a lonely person and you're not connecting with other people, and you got issues and you're not dealing with those issues, and if you're, having psychopathic traits, that is a problem, and it's in isolation. It's the opposite of connectivity and community. But I do think that there is something very specific about the United States, because all these movies that we talk about, whether we talk about Bonnie and Clyde or Pulp Fiction or The Wild Bunch or the Wick films, they all show in all the other, they show in all countries all around the world, and we're the only one that's having this very unique problem. And I think it's just there's enough psychopaths who do have scary access to some very, very scary military-grade machinery, which
I think, unfortunately, though, it's not just the USA, because it washes across the border. You remember in the Obama years, there was like Fast and Furious, this wonderful ATF scheme to get firearms into Mexico to the max in order to, then we're going to bust the bad guys. But they never busted the bad guys. They just flooded Mexico with firearms. And then the guns go from Mexico to Central America. And you end up with a situation like that depicted in Luis Estrada's film Hell, El Infierno. I don't know if you've seen that. Yeah,
I have. That's amazing.
It's a killer film, isn't it?
Oh, it's insane. It's chilling.
An amazing film, because here's this guy who gets a Mexican guy who's been in the States for 20 years. I kind of a ne'er-do-well guy. He hasn't saved any money. He hasn't sent any money back to his family. He gets deported and he comes back to his hometown and he's looking for a job, and the only job he can get is working for a cartel. Mm-hmm. And it starts off like a comedy, but it doesn't end up like a comedy.
No.
But I mean, that's also, you can also follow the follow the money too. I mean, who's making money? Who's actually getting rich from this, spreading these machine guns, and putting them on the gray market, the black market, and in general. I mean, that's.
And who gets rich selling cruise missiles and Trident missiles for submarines? Our Secretary of Defense, formerly of the board of Raytheon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's a sickness that doesn't. In a way, picking on small arms and saying, "Oh, it's crazy. These crazy guys they should never have an assault rifle. Nobody should have a nuclear weapon either."
This is true.
Well,
yeah,
I'll agree with you on that for sure.
Yeah. Landmines and cruise missiles are not super useful either. So yeah,
exactly. And Trump brought landmines back into the inventory of the U.S. military, and Biden has not rescinded that.
Yeah, that's not okay.
Yeah.
So we have to look at the big picture too, and say, and the big picture takes us to a lot of foreign countries, to Syria, including a young man who was born in Syria in 1999. And came to the United States and lived here for a number of years and allegedly became radicalized and then bought a gun and went to King Soopers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the big picture, though, we're here as people involved in film, which we like to see on the big screen. That's our big picture. Yeah. And so I think that because I am gonna wrap this up because we're past our usual allotment here.
Oh, but I want to ask a question first.
Sure.
About how movies are shot now, because and what you were saying about the hearing loss as a result of the discharges and stuff.
Yeah.
If you were doing a movie with gunfire in it now. Mm-hmm. Would they still be loading blanks into the firearms, or would all of that stuff be put in later in post-production?
Yeah, honestly, for a studio film, for a Hollywood studio film, no. It's all done in post. They have guns, they're called non-guns, that they activate as if it's essentially an air pistol. They activate as if it's a real weapon. It looks just like a real weapon. It discharges a casing as if it's a real weapon, but it just makes like a little air sound. And because it's much cheaper for them to put the little flash and the blood hits and the reset time from squibs and all that stuff is insane now. If you go overseas, I was in Asia and South America, and we did do real squibs because it was just cheaper to do that than to do the digital effects then. But no, they don't do that anymore because it's just not worth their time.
And that was what we found when because we did Pablo and I did a movie about, ironically, about gun violence and about policing methods. That was the last film I directed, which was Tombstone Rashomon. And we ended up doing all of that in post because there were horses involved and also because it was just quicker and cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, there are some times, but usually what happens is that somebody stands off camera with a couple of wedges and bangs them together to simulate, to give a little bit of a start to the actors, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, look, I recommend you read a book called Harvest of Empire by Juan Williams. I know it's controversial right now, but it does talk a lot about what you were talking about with El Infierno.
Harvest of Empire.
Yeah, it's about the blowback. It's about like what the United States has done essentially since the World War II up to now, Central South America and the Latin American states. And we've created the problem. We've created MS-13. We created the gangs and the cartels, in order to sort of further corporate, global economic, The Zetas were trained at a U.S. military base and then went back and immediately deserted and joined the cartel. That's right. They were all trained just south of Atlanta at the School of the Americas, including Manuel Noriega, trained at the School of the Americas, and he was useful until he wasn't useful. Yeah. So and Juan Williams is the name of the author? Juan Williams, and it's called Harvest of Empire. So the harvest of the U.S. empire is this blowback of all these things we've done, Trujillo and in the Dominican Republic. And stuff with Chile, with Allende, and all these coups and military coups and the Sandinistas and creating the Iran-Contra affair. We created the problem we have literally today with hundreds of thousands of people, including children from Central South America, standing in Mexico, fleeing Central America because of violence, and so the solution is to give more money to the police and the army that we created. So I think it's a book worth reading. I know one is a little bit controversial because of his relationship with Fox, but it's still I think a fantastic book and well researched. Okay, I'll look for it. Thank you.
All right. Well, obviously there's way more to say about this subject, but more than we can fit in our episode today. Alan, I just really want to thank you for joining us. I know you are, when you're on a shoot, what are your schedules like? You're like, 14-hour days or something, or it's just...
it's pretty crazy. I know Alex knows, but it's crazy. And we go nonstop and...
Oh, we work less and less. No, now we've got it down to about, how long do we work on Tombstone? About 10 hours a day or something like that.
Yeah,
it was
at most, light. A couple hours here, long lunches, lots of pasta.
So is it...
Siesta after lunch.
So Alan, do you have tinnitus in both ears by any chance, or is it just one?
Actually, it's my left ear, because when I was doing these movies, it was film, and I was operating. I was shooting, but I was also operating the camera because it was to keep it very tight. Yeah. And what would happen is that the director would run up to me. It was actually, in fact, on the Mechanic, it was the director who ended up doing like the John Wick movies and Deadpool and that same guy. But he was the second unit, the action guy at the time. But he'd run up in between takes and say, as the armorers were resetting all the ammo and the weapons and explosives and the charge and the squibs, and give me instructions. And okay, great. So I take my little earplug out while that would happen. And then of course what inevitably would happen is they'd say roll cameras, roll sound, roll cameras, and then he'd get an idea and run up and tap me on the shoulder. I'd pull my headphones off. He's like, oh, make sure you tag this moment because this is going to be cool when Jason Statham does X or Y or whatever. Like, okay, I got it. And then action. And then, and at that point, then things are going crazy. So I was shovel my right ear against the magazine to protect it. And I couldn't let go. I could try to get my thumb into my ear, but there's Jason standing next to my ear shooting an M4 with casings hitting my head and going into the back of my shirt and burning my back, and scars, marks on my back from hot casings, tick, 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 tick. And the director comes up later and goes, "Wow, that was so realistic. You looked, it was like crazy." I'm like, "Yeah, it hurt." I was like, "I can't hear you out of that ear." So it is mostly my left ear because that's the ear that would be.
Well, I've got tinnitus in my left ear too, but it's not from any kind of action sequences. Oh well, it's bottle rocket wars in the graveyard back in the day. I think.
Oh yeah, sure.
Those. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, it was great to talk with you both. Thanks so much for joining.
What a pleasure.
Hey, listen, Pablo, thanks for making it possible. That was a very interesting conversation, and thanks, Sam, for coming along. That was really nice.
I appreciate it. Alex, what a pleasure talking with you. I think you're such an important and wonderful filmmaker. I want to see what you're going to do next.
Oh, well, you're so kind, and I just wish you all the best, and I hope that you have a trouble-free shooting existence insofar as it's possible henceforth.
Well, I'm doing a lovely romantic comedy with a wonderful African Kenyan director. His name is Wanuri Cadillo in Austin this summer, and I'm looking forward to that.
Great.
People talking and feeling. That sounds like nice to me.
There you
Excellent.
go. Get away from the guns.
Okay.
All right, fellas. Nice talking to you both.
Yeah. Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
And cut. Okay, that's a wrap.
Thanks again for joining Alex Cox and myself today. I'd like to thank Jason Phelps for handling the audio and Ted Thacker for letting us use the intro to his song, The Ballad of Slim Cessna, for the musical cues that bookend these conversations.